Good afternoon. It's Tuesday, the 10th of October 2017, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. With me in the studio, Mike Robinson. And we're delighted to be joined today by Alex Thomson with Eastern Approaches, and of course Alex reporting from his base in the Netherlands.
So let's remind everybody of Vroom Stop War's Media on Trial event taking place in Bloomsbury Central Baptist Church on Thursday the 19th of October. Please do get along to this if you possibly can. It's headlined by John Pilger and a bunch of other fantastic speakers at that. £9 in advance. You can get the details for that on eventbrite.com. Just search for Media on Trial and John Pilger and you'll get that. Okay, £10 on the door, I believe. As I say, any profits that are made on this are going to be donated to help the situation in Yemen.
I'll just add in there that, of course, remember that there are many journalists, I think an increasing number of journalists who are beginning to join the dots up. Many of them are under huge pressure. They're in newspapers where they're warned off particular stories by their own editorial boards. So in putting the media on trial, this is not about simply pointing a finger at what they do wrong. It's also to encourage the better journalists to see what they need to do to get it right.
Encourage or demand?
You can have either. Yes. I think encourage works in the right circumstances, but demand in the other.
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's come right back onto UK news, and Ted Heath, former Prime Minister, is the subject. Reports over the weekend, we'll pick up on the Mail here because this was a positive report, one of the very few, on Chief Constable of Wiltshire Police Mike Veal. What did they have to say? Well, if we just bring in the first chunk, Mike Veal has spent 2 years being assailed by the establishment over his investigation into paedophile allegations against Edward Heath. He's had to bite his lip as Mandarin's ex-cabinet ministers, Tory MPs, peers, members of the judiciary and media moguls lambasted his controversial Operation Conifer. And they say here he's been accused of being stupid, leading a witch hunt, and told he'd be forced to resign. So this was a senior police officer doing his job, which the government says should be done, the investigation of child abuse allegations. And when this man did his job, Mike, what happens? The same establishment turns around and vilifies him because he dares to start investigating accusations against a former Tory Prime Minister, Ted Heath. If you haven't read this article, I'd encourage you to do it. It goes on to say he was interviewed since the release of the report, but he's calling for certain things. He's calling for a new inquiry to lance the boil of sinister claims that a Westminster child sex ring was covered up by the establishment. He, I believe, thinks that ring is still in operation. I certainly believe it's still in operation. He said he could have spent 2 or 3 more years investigating Edward Heath if his officers had been allowed to dig deeper. So there we are. The state pulled this man off an investigation into Ted Heath. And what are these papers doing? It's all apology. It's apology. So let's start with Theresa May. I've shown this several times over the last few days, but when she came in, she was going to tackle Trump on the abuse of women. But in the background, of course, she was part of the team as Home Secretary of imprisoning a child abuse survivor and whistleblower, Melanie Shaw, over 14 months in solitary confinement. There can only be one reason that they wanted her out. They wanted Melanie Shaw out of the way while this investigation into Heath went on. What's Melanie been talking about? Well, she's been talking about Jimmy Savile visiting Beechwood Children's Home, but of course she's one of many survivors in the Midland areas talking about links between political members and abuse, much of which was carried on in London. But there we are. Theresa May did nothing, and she's made no apology for the situation with Ted Heath. So does she condone it?
Good question.
Good question. Well, what's the BBC up to? Well, they're into the heart of it. We've got them coming up with this headline: Wiltshire Police faces further Edward Heath question. So it isn't Heath that's under investigation, it's the police, according to the BBC. But they go one better. Look here, and now they've jumped to a story about Cyril Smith. Well, the BBC didn't stand up and complain about the damage to Cyril Smith's reputation at the time. They were quite happy to report, but of course he was a nasty Lib Dem.
Yeah.
Nasty Lib Dem. So let's go to the Guardian, and then perhaps we'll bring Alex back in. We've got Sonia Soda here saying, is Ted Heath's reputation the victim of a flawed system? Nothing about the damage and pain to child abuse victims, but is Ted Heath's reputation, has it been damaged by a flawed system? Well, she worked hard on this article because if you look at it, she works to confuse the public over the subject. It's Heath's reputation, it's what the police did. There is no mention of the vile crime of child abuse. She drifts people around in this article. I've got to give her credit, it's extremely well-crafted, very clever article. Sympathy for men. She has sympathy for men caught in the rumours of child abuse. She doesn't mention women, so apparently, according to her, well, there's not really any women abusers. The police investigation was against Ted Heath. Well, they were investigating, but we put that little spin on the investigation was against. It was biased because they were investigating him. This is also playing with your mind. Jimmy Savile, don't worry about that. That was just an institutional failing.
Right.
Crown Prosecution Service is rightly clear that it does not say whether somebody dead would have met the threshold for charging. To do so would be to cast an aspersion on those who cannot be tried by the courts. So a nice little spin. We're back on the fact we mustn't say anything about this man because he's dead. The Conifer report consistently uses the word victim when, of course, they can't be a victim until a court has proved they're a victim. So let's squash the child abuse people coming forward. It would be far better properly to resource the underfunded specialist support for those reporting rape. Don't investigate who carried the crime out. Let's help the victims.
That's right, because anybody that's experienced rape, really, they've only got a mental health issue. You've got to deal with that, and then the rape, that just goes away.
Yeah,
you don't have to worry about it anymore.
Push
right?
that to one side, and we'll end here. We rightly have a high evidentiary bar. People are innocent until found guilty beyond reasonable doubt by a jury. But we already know that the state didn't want anybody to get in front of a jury. This is my key question. Don't we have a right to know that this country was ruled by a Prime Minister who it appears has been abusing children? Isn't that the meat of it? Alex, I'll bring you back in here. I've got a little bit more to cover, but I find this woman's report outrageous.
Yes, she is an attack dog, or since she's female, you could use the female word for dog in that phrase, but she's an attack dog. The German phrase for such journalists is a desk-bound murderer. They're well known, this kind of journalist, in the German establishment, but the British establishment has them too, often over the same issues of covering up elite child abuse. Someone in the chat room has been reminding us, Mr. Icke, who can't be rubbished. He was years, decades ahead of others in this game. No, sorry, I shouldn't say game in such a serious matter. In this investigation, David Icke pointed out a long time ago that 5 unconnected victims, alleged victims, have told RAINS, who put out the RAINS list, RAINS, separately about the same fetish, which involved scratching his victims with long artificial claws, and named satanic ritual abuse, which is the thing that even Mr. Veal is not daring or not able to put out at the moment. These aspects will desperately be put a lid on. The corroboration, the specific details of the scratching with claws and the Satanism. And I'm sorry that if people are disgusted by this, but if you call yourself any kind of believer or Christian, you've got to stand up to Satanism and name it for what it is. Otherwise, we're going to go through generations more of this.